Hi, welcome back to our class online. So this lecture, we're going to be starting a new topic, which we'll touch on today, introduce it, and then we will be continuing with this topic when we return from spring break. And so we'll be talking about identity in several different ways, including ethnicity, gender, race, and also nationalism. What types of concepts or constructions do people use to create identity, to create these different categories of us and them, us and the other? How do we group other people? How do we group ourselves? And so ethnicity is one of the main ways by which people form different identities. So we'll start off with that. We'll get into race, gender, nationalism the week we come back from the break. And so today, what we'll be talking about is a specific ethnic group known as the Hmong. The Hmong are a large ethnic group from the mountainous regions of China, Vietnam, Laos, and also Thailand. They're a subsistence-based society, so the Hmong, they're essentially hill farmers. They survive off of what they grow, what they farm in their traditional environments. They also have what we call a patrilineal clan social organization. Since we've been touching on kinship, I thought I would mention that. So what we're going to do to introduce us to this concept of ethnicity and identity is watch a film called Becoming American. It's a little bit older, but it's really, really good. And it's about the Hmong, who were, several of which were resettled as refugees in the United States after what's called the US's Secret War in Laos and Vietnam. So what is the Secret War? It's called the US's Secret War because they didn't tell the American people what they were doing. It was sort of a secret project done by the CIA and the United States federal government. And they were over fighting in Laos and Vietnam during the Laotian Civil War and also the Vietnam War. And American soldiers, US soldiers, enlisted and recruited Hmong villagers to fight for them, basically like guerrilla warfare. The Hmong are familiar with the terrain, that's where they live. They can get around the jungles much easier than some of the American troops. And so they recruited the Hmong as essentially guerrilla warfare to fight for them against the Vietnamese. So after the US pulled out of Vietnam, the Vietnamese began essentially systematically seeking out and exterminating the Hmong. They were murdering them because the Hmong had fought against the Vietnamese on the side of the US. When the US pulled out, the Vietnamese began seeking them out and killing them. Hundreds of thousands of people died. A few thousand lucky Hmong were airlifted by Air America at the time out of the area. Many others were not. Many of them lived in the forest for months, even years, sometimes eating sticks and leaves and bark just to stay alive, until eventually, if they didn't die, many made it to refugee camps, places in other countries outside of their homeland where they can stay in these camps, which are not nice places to be. Refugee camps don't have a lot of resources. They're crowded. They're usually dirty. Water's a problem. Sanitation's a problem. It's not a nice place to be. It's not somewhere that you leave your homeland thinking, I'm going to go score and live in a refugee camp. It's not nice. So many of them resettled into refugee camps, which are sort of temporary. The idea is you stay there until it's safe to go back home. And if it's not safe to go back home, which essentially if any of the Hmong were to try to go back to where they're from, they would be killed by the Vietnamese. And so many of them stayed in refugee camps. Some of the luckiest ones, using that term lucky loosely, were resettled in third host countries. So if you're a refugee, there's sort of three options. Refugee, you're basically facing, you're seeking political or social or economic asylum in another country outside your own because you're not going to be able to survive where you're living. You're either being systematically exterminated, like in the case of the Hmong, or economically you can't survive, like in the case of many families that are migrating northward from Central and South America. They're not coming up to live off the fat of Walmart and McDonald's. Can you imagine sort of leaving every single thing you know, how you live, what you eat, your friends, your family, your home, to go live in a completely different foreign world to you, a different culture, a different language where you don't really understand anything that's going on. Is that something you want to do? Yeah, that's not something most other people want to do either. When people flee their homeland and seek asylum and are refugees, it's because they basically face certain death where they live. That's true for the Hmong. That's true for a lot of immigrants coming up from the South right now. And so after the Secret War, several Hmong refugees were ultimately resettled in the US. And so the film Becoming American is about resettlement of Hmong refugees in different places in the United States. It was made in 1983. I guess so it's a little bit older, but it's really, really good. It's going to show you what the Hmong sort of deal with, trying to negotiate their identity in this very new context, and also sort of how the Hmong are treated by people in the US, right? Um, Sort of this idea that they're not us, but the other. And so you'll see some of that in the film as well, which just to tie that into what's going on today, there's been a lot of racism and prejudice attacks on Asian American communities in the US because of the coronavirus. Some people have erroneously blamed certain populations for the virus, and it's not only really disgusting and inaccurate, but there's negative consequences that come from these ideas, from these conceptions of identity, of where people are supposed to belong, right? And so pay attention to some of that going on in the film. And another question, the main question I want you to sort of keep in mind as you watch and take some notes is, should we, either in general or specifically here in the US, allow refugees to resettle here? You can argue either way, but why or why not? Why do you feel the way you feel? Again, the options for refugees, once they're in a situation facing either political or economic or social problems where they're probably not going to be able to make it in their homeland, they can stay and likely die. They can flee and hopefully make it to a refugee camp. And the third other option is some of those, after going through years of paperwork and vetting, may get resettled in a third host country, like somewhere in Europe or in this case, the US. And so one of the arguments for why we absolutely should allow the Hmong to resettle here as refugees is because they wouldn't even be refugees if it wasn't for US involvement in their homeland, enlisting the Hmong to fight for us in our war against the Vietnamese. And then we pulled out, left, pulled all our troops out. The Hmong began systematically being exterminated. So that's one argument for why, because they wouldn't even be in the situation if it wasn't for our actions. So it's something to think about and come down with a reason of sort of why. Okay, so with that, what we're going to do now is you go ahead and go back to the slide I just showed you with the film Becoming American, and it has a link on the bottom of it. You're going to copy and paste that link or type it into your browser and then watch the film. So use that exact link, pop it into your browser, pull it up. The film should automatically start on part 1. It's broken down for some reason into 6 parts, part 1, 2, 3, etc., all the way through part 6. Each part's about 9-10 minutes. Start it, it will automatically play into part 2, into part 3. So it'll do it for you automatically. Just pop in the link, start, make sure it starts on part 1, and it'll take you all the way through the whole film. It's a little less than an hour, parts 1 through 6. Sorry, it's kind of weird. I've been teaching this for 6 years, and that's the only way I've been able to show the film. Use the link. If you have any trouble or confusion, email me, contact me. I can even pop on Zoom and talk you through it if necessary. So after you finish up this lecture, which you now have, if you're listening to me talk right now, go ahead and watch the film to illustrate some of the stuff I've been talking about. And again, this question about should we allow refugees to resettle here, and maybe why should we, or if you don't think so, why not? Okay, so with that, you have the wrap up on exchange from this week, lecture on kinship and marriage, which I'll be posting shortly, and then this lecture on identity, beginning with ethnicity. We'll be continuing with identity after we return from the break. You do have a quiz on the material for this week. It'll be available later today, and then you have until all the way through break until the Tuesday after we return. So the idea is you can cover the material now and take the quiz tonight. You can cover it this weekend. You're welcome to cover it during the break, but you can also wait and cover it on the first few days when we come back from break. I want you guys to have a spring break, and I don't necessarily want you working a lot during the break. So get it done now, do it over break, do it at the end. You have until April 7th, 12 o'clock noon on the Tuesday that we return from break. And I hope you do take some of the break over spring break. Take a rest. You guys have definitely earned it. So with that, we'll be meeting soon. Have a great week.